Do not fear the storm. The one who walks with you commands the sea.
Night falls quietly when the soul is heavy. There are moments in life when the silence feels unbearable, when the future seems to collapse before our eyes, when every door appears closed and every prayer feels as though it disappears into the darkness. Perhaps you have known nights like this, moments when fear sits beside you like an unwanted companion, moments when your mind whispers questions that have no easy answers. What if everything falls apart? What if I lose what I love most? What if I'm not strong enough to endure what lies ahead? Human history is filled with these moments, moments when individuals stand at the edge of despair, staring into uncertainty. But in the middle of that darkness, the voice of God speaks. Not loudly, not with thunder, but with a calm authority that cuts through fear like light piercing the night. And the message is astonishingly simple. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. These words are found in the book of Isaiah, chapter 41, verse 10. And though they were spoken thousands of years ago, they carry a message that feels uncannily personal, because they were spoken to people who believed everything was already lost. To understand the weight of these words, we must step back into the ancient world. The people of Israel were facing one of the darkest chapters of their history. Empires were rising and falling like storms across the ancient Near East. Nations were swallowed by conquest. Cities burned. Families were torn apart. The threat of exile hung over Israel like a gathering shadow. Fear was not theoretical for them. Fear was political. Fear was national. Fear was deeply personal. They lived under the looming power of foreign kings, rulers whose armies crushed resistance without mercy. And in that atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty, God spoke through the prophet Isaiah. But Isaiah did not deliver a message of shallow comfort. He did not say, "Everything will be easy." He did not promise that suffering would disappear. Instead, God spoke something far more powerful. He promised his presence. "Fear not, for I am with you." Notice the difference. God did not say, "Fear not, because there are no enemies." He did not say, "Fear not, because the future will be predictable." He said, "Fear not, because I am with you." This is a radically different kind of promise. Because fear thrives on uncertainty. Our minds imagine worst-case scenarios. Our hearts anticipate loss before it arrives. We fear illness, betrayal, financial collapse, loneliness, failure, death. Even the strongest person eventually faces something that shakes their confidence. And when those moments come, human strength alone often feels fragile. But Isaiah 41:10 reveals something profound about the nature of God. God does not merely observe our struggles from a distance, he enters them. Throughout Scripture, this pattern appears again and again. When Abraham walked into the unknown land God had promised him, the Lord assured him of his presence. When Moses trembled before the impossible task of confronting Pharaoh, God said in Exodus 3:12, "Certainly I will be with you." When Joshua stood at the edge of the promised land, facing enemies stronger than his people, God told him in Joshua 1:9, "Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Over and over, the same promise echoes across the pages of the Bible, not the promise of an easy life, but the promise of divine presence. And yet, even with these promises, fear still finds ways to creep into the human heart. Why? Because fear is not only about circumstances, fear is about perception. When Peter stepped out onto the water toward Jesus in Matthew 14, he walked on the impossible for a moment. But the moment he focused on the wind and waves, fear swallowed his faith. The storm had not changed, but Peter's focus had, and perhaps this is one of the greatest spiritual battles every believer faces. What will we focus on, the storm or the one who commands the storm? Isaiah's message to Israel was not simply political encouragement. It was a call to reorient their vision. God reminds them, "I am your God." Those 4 words carry immense weight. In the ancient world, nations believed their survival depended on alliances, military strength, and powerful kings. But God was reminding Israel that their true security was not in armies or diplomacy. Their security was in Him. I am your God, the same God who parted the Red Sea, the same God who fed them with manna in the wilderness, the same God who caused the walls of Jericho to fall without a single weapon raised. When God says, I am your God, He is reminding His people of His character. And the character of God is the foundation of faith. Because faith is not blind optimism. Faith is confidence in who God has proven Himself to be. The God of Scripture is not fragile, He does not panic, and He does not abandon His people when situations become complicated. Isaiah continues the message with even deeper assurance. I will strengthen you. Think about the implications of this. God does not merely watch from heaven while we struggle, He strengthens. There are seasons when human strength simply runs out. Moments when we feel emotionally exhausted, spiritually dry, mentally overwhelmed. Even the great prophet Elijah experienced this. After calling down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, Elijah fled in fear when Queen Jezebel threatened his life. He wandered into the wilderness and collapsed beneath a tree, praying that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said in 1 Kings 19. One of the greatest prophets in Israel's history, overwhelmed by fear and despair. But what did God do? Did He condemn Elijah for his weakness? No. God strengthened him, first through rest, then through nourishment, and finally through a quiet whisper, reminding Elijah that he was not alone. God does not abandon His servants when they feel weak. He strengthens them in ways they may not expect. Isaiah's message continues, Yes, I will help you. This phrase carries deep relational meaning. God is not distant. He is not passive. He is actively involved in the lives of His people. Psalm 46 echoes this truth. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Not a distant help, not a theoretical help. A present help, and perhaps that word, present, is one of the most powerful truths in all of Scripture. Because the greatest fear humans carry is the fear of facing suffering alone. But God repeatedly assures His people that they are never alone. Even in the valley of the shadow of death, as Psalm 23 declares, the Lord walks beside them. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The promise of Isaiah 41:10 culminates in a breathtaking image. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. In biblical language, the right hand represents power, authority, and victory. Kings extended their right hand as a symbol of protection. Warriors wielded their weapons with their right hand. But here, God Himself is the one holding His people up. This means that when believers feel as though they are about to collapse, God sustains them. When they feel as though they cannot take another step, God carries them forward. And this truth is not merely poetic. It is woven throughout the entire story of redemption. Consider Joseph, betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. Years of injustice followed. False accusations, imprisonment, isolation. If anyone had reason to believe his life was ruined, it was Joseph. Yet years later, standing before the very brothers who had betrayed him, Joseph said something extraordinary in Genesis 50:20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Joseph's story reveals something profound about the nature of God's presence. God was with Joseph in the pit. God was with Joseph in slavery. God was with Joseph in prison. And eventually, God lifted him into a position where he would save countless lives. But imagine Joseph in the middle of that story. Imagine him sitting in a dark prison cell. From a human perspective, everything looked lost, but heaven was still moving. And this is the hidden mystery of divine providence. God often works most powerfully in the seasons when His presence feels hardest to see. The cross of Christ itself is the ultimate example. On the surface, the crucifixion looked like total defeat. Jesus, beaten, mocked, and executed. His followers scattered in fear. Hope seemed buried with Him in the tomb. Yet what looked like the darkest moment in history was actually the turning point of salvation. Through the cross, God defeated sin and death. Through the resurrection, He revealed that darkness never has the final word. This is why the promise of Isaiah 41:10 carries such extraordinary power, because it is not merely a comforting phrase, it is a declaration rooted in the entire character and history of God. The God who speaks these words is the same God who raises the dead, parts seas, moves kingdoms, and transforms broken lives. Which leads to a deeply personal question. What are you afraid of right now? Perhaps it is uncertainty about the future. Perhaps it is a battle with anxiety that seems relentless. Perhaps it is the fear of losing someone you love, or the fear that the mistakes of your past have already defined your destiny. Fear whispers that the situation is hopeless. Fear insists that you must face the darkness alone. But the voice of God says something very different. Fear not. Not because life will be simple, not because suffering will disappear overnight, but because God Himself walks beside those who trust Him. And sometimes, the moment when everything seems lost is actually the moment when God is about to reveal His power in ways we could never have imagined. But there is still something about this promise that raises an important question. If God is truly with His people, why do believers still experience suffering? Why do storms still come? Why do faithful people sometimes walk through seasons of overwhelming pain? There is a moment in every life when faith collides with reality. It is easy to speak about trusting God when the sky is clear and the road ahead feels stable. It is easier to believe when prayers seem answered quickly and blessings arrive without resistance. But faith is not truly tested in comfort. Faith is tested when the night grows long. It is tested when answers delay, when pain lingers, when the future refuses to reveal itself. This is where the words of Isaiah 41:10 become more than a verse. They become a lifeline. Fear not, for I am with you. Yet if God is with His people, why do storms still come? Why do faithful people walk through valleys that seem unbearably dark? Scripture never hides this tension. The Bible is remarkably honest about it. Consider Job. The story of Job is one of the most unsettling narratives in Scripture. Job 1:1 describes him as blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. Yet in a moment, everything collapses. His wealth disappears, his servants are killed, his children die in a devastating disaster, and as if that were not enough, painful sores cover his entire body. If suffering were always the result of personal failure, Job's story would make sense. But that is not what the Bible reveals. Job's suffering is not punishment. It is a mystery. And in that mystery, fear and despair begin to creep in. His friends try to explain his suffering with simple answers. They insist Job must have done something wrong. But the truth is far more complex. God eventually speaks, not by explaining every detail, but by revealing something greater, His presence. The Lord answers Job out of a whirlwind, and in that moment, Job realizes that even without understanding his path, God had never abandoned him. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, Job says in Job 42:5, but now my eye sees you. One of the deepest spiritual realities in Scripture emerges here. Sometimes suffering becomes the place where we encounter God in ways we never could in comfort. This does not mean pain is good. The Bible never glorifies suffering. But it reveals that God can transform suffering into something meaningful. This truth echoes throughout the lives of many biblical figures. Consider David. Before becoming king of Israel, David spent years running for his life. King Saul, consumed by jealousy, hunted him like a criminal. David slept in caves. He hid in wilderness strongholds. He lived under constant threat of death. During those years, David wrote many psalms, and if you read them carefully, something remarkable appears. David does not pretend everything is fine. He cries out in anguish, "How long, O Lord?" He writes in Psalm 13, "Will you forget me forever?" These words are raw and deeply human, yet in the same psalm, David declares, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love." How can someone move from despair to trust in the same prayer? Because David understood something about God's presence. Fear loses its power when we realize the story is not finished. When Joseph sat in prison, the story was not finished. When David hid in caves, the story was not finished. When Israel walked through exile, the story was not finished. And when Jesus hung on the cross, the story was far from finished. The resurrection revealed something fear never anticipated. Death itself could not stop the purposes of God. This is why the promise of Isaiah 41:10 is not merely comforting. It is revolutionary. Fear not, for I am with you. The power of this promise lies in who is speaking, the one who created the stars, the one who controls history, the one who sees the end from the beginning. Now, when God says, I will strengthen you, He is not offering symbolic encouragement. He is declaring divine help. And sometimes that strength appears in unexpected ways, not always through the removal of hardship, but through the transformation of the person walking through it. The Apostle Paul understood this deeply. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul describes what he calls a thorn in the flesh. We are never told exactly what it was, perhaps illness, perhaps persecution. 3 times Paul pleaded with God to remove it, but the answer surprised him. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Why would God allow weakness to remain? Because weakness reveals where true strength comes from. Paul reaches a startling conclusion. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Human strength depends on circumstances. Divine strength flows through dependence. And this is why fear loses its grip when faith deepens. Fear tells us everything depends on us. Faith reminds us everything rests in God's hands. Isaiah continues with one of Scripture's most powerful images. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Imagine someone stumbling on a steep path. Their strength is failing, that their balance is gone, but suddenly a strong hand grips their arm and lifts them before they fall. That is the picture Isaiah paints. God sustaining His people when they cannot sustain themselves. This image appears again in Psalm 37:24. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with His hand. Notice what the psalm does not say. It does not say believers will never stumble. It says they will not be abandoned when they do. This truth matters for anyone who feels spiritually exhausted. There are seasons when faith feels strong, but there are also seasons when faith feels fragile, moments when prayer feels difficult, moments when doubt whispers loudly, moments when fear returns again and again. But the promise of Isaiah 41:10 does not depend on our emotions. It depends on the character of God. God's presence does not disappear when we feel weak. If anything, it becomes clearer. This truth reaches its fullest expression in Jesus. When Jesus entered the world, He did not come as a distant ruler. He entered the brokenness of human life. He experienced hunger, exhaustion, grief, betrayal, and ultimately, death. The Gospel of Matthew gives Him a remarkable title, Emmanuel. It means God with us. Not God observing us, God with us. Jesus stepped into the fears humanity carries, and through His resurrection, He revealed those fears do not have ultimate authority. This is why the final words Jesus speaks before ascending echo Isaiah's promise. In Matthew 28:20, He says, "And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." The same promise, the same presence. From Isaiah to the Gospels, the message never changes. God does not promise a life without storms. He promises storms will never have the final word. Think about the disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee in Mark chapter 4. A violent storm erupts. Waves crash over the boat. Experienced fishermen panic. And Jesus is asleep. Terrified, they wake Him. "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus rises, rebukes the wind, and the sea becomes calm. Then He asks, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" The storm was real, but the disciples forgot one crucial detail. Jesus was in the boat. Fear convinced them they were alone, but they were not. And how often does the same thing happen in our lives? The storm grows louder, the waves rise higher, and fear whispers that God has disappeared. But the truth remains unchanged. If Christ is present, the storm cannot destroy what God intends to preserve. This does not mean life becomes easy, but it means fear does not get the final say. Isaiah's words echo across centuries. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. Dismay is deeper than fear. Fear reacts to danger. Dismay believes hope has collapsed. But God addresses both, fear and dismay, because he knows the fragile nature of the human heart. And yet his promise remains steady. I will help you. 3 simple words, but they contain infinite power. God helps, faithfully, even when we cannot yet see how. Which brings us back to the message of Isaiah 41:10. When everything seems lost, God says one thing: do not be afraid, not because the situation looks easy, but because the outcome belongs to Him. And perhaps someone listening right now feels they are standing in that very place, a place where the future feels uncertain, where fear keeps returning, where darkness feels overwhelming. But the promise of Scripture remains unchanged. God has not abandoned you. He sees what you cannot see. He is working in ways not yet visible. And even if the path leads through hardship, His presence will not leave you. Fear may speak loudly, but it does not speak with final authority, because the God who says, "Fear not," is the same God who conquered death. And if this reflection helped you see that promise more clearly, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe to continue exploring the deep truths of Scripture with us. Leave a like if this message strengthened your faith. And in the comments, share what this verse means to you, or the moment when you most needed to hear the words, "Fear not, for I am with you." Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs, because sometimes the message that lifts one heart becomes the light that guides another through the darkness.